Hey, I'm coming to you today and not really excited about what we have to talk about today, but it's a very important topic that we need to talk about. And here's how it came about. I've actually never heard of this, the Bathsheba syndrome. I think maybe I've heard about it in passing at one point or another, but I've never really heard this talked about. And it came about because, and I'm not going to use this as a gossip podcast, but I'm not telling you anything that you can't find 100 articles about online right now. One of our county supervisors, Nathan Fletcher, this is pretty shocking. A lot of recent reports would call him San Diego County's most powerful politician. And he is married to a very powerful politician, probably in the state of California, I would say. So the two of them together were like the power couple. Nathan Fletcher, he ran for mayor unsuccessfully 2 times. That's my understanding. Used to be a Republican, did some time in the Marines, used to be a Republican, and then switched parties. I think he became an independent. That didn't work out, became a Democrat, and that worked out incredibly well for him. And I think his first office that he ran for right out of the gate was county supervisor, and he won it handily. And so he was really being set up. He was getting ready to run for state senate, and I think he was probably eyeing the governorship of California, and I have no doubt that he probably could have gotten there. Very talented person, I'll tell you this. He and I are close to the same age. He might be like a year older than I am. I've been in the same room with him a couple of times. One of the meetings I was at, I actually sat right next to him, and he's just a dynamic personality. He's very talented, very serious, incredibly well spoken, and he's really made a lot of good decisions. I'm not speaking politically. I'm speaking just from a personal perspective to get him, to get him where he was. Again, listed as probably the most powerful politician in San Diego County. Anyway, last week it came out. I found out about the first last week. Last week was a week of incredible headlines. As I'm talking about this, it's April 8th, I believe it is. Last week was it was like the last week of March of 2023. We saw our President Trump was indicted. Former President Trump was indicted. Nathan Fletcher, I'm not really talking about him today. That's not why we're talking about it. But he started off the week, I think it was on a Sunday, by reporting that he was going to go out and seek therapy, seek help because of his PTSD. And a lot of people applauded that. Hey, way to go. Way to take care of yourself. Very next day it came out. What it really was going on was that there was a sexual harassment lawsuit getting ready to be filed against him, and there's proof, there's Instagram messages that were shared back and forth, and it was just kind of a mess. And so he's out of the state right now, and he's getting the treatment he needs, getting the help. Calls for resignation. More than likely we will never see Nathan Fletcher in that kind of way again. It's this is one of those things that's really hard to come back from. In San Diego, boy, we have been Bob Filner, former mayor, he got in almost the same kind of trouble. Duncan Hunter, there was another gentleman, I can't think of his name, Duke Cunningham, Duncan Hunter. I don't know if Duncan Hunter's spent any time in jail or not. I think he may have. I'm not sure, or at least he came close to it. And now Nathan Fletcher. We just seem to have a history where things like this happen. And so it really took me by surprise. He was not the person, right? There might be some politicians out here in San Diego County that I think that this might happen to. He's not the one. So this was a little bit surprising for me. And so I found this article, I think I was reading about it. It's the Times of San Diego. And it was an opinion piece by James P. Rudolph. And here's what the opinion piece states. It says, the all too human reasons for Nathan Fletcher's sudden fall from grace. And that's what this was. It's a fall from grace, a place where he was elevated, literally one of the most powerful people in our county. And San Diego County is nothing to sneeze at. I think it's the second largest county in California. It's a very large county. San Diego City in itself is the eighth largest city in the United States of America. And so the county, there's a lot going on here, and he was perched right up there at the top, moving places, going places. Had no doubt he was going to win that state senator. He's just like the politician that once he found his lane, And I do think the marriage to Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher had something to do with that. I think it helped him for sure. I'm not sure that's what his motives, were that. I think there was real love between the two of them, but that move certainly helped him. And once that happened, it was like his entire career, he's untouchable. And so this is, I'll say that this is sad. So I just want to read a little bit from this piece, but then I want to get into the Bathsheba syndrome, because here's the deal. We can talk about Nathan and we can gossip about him, or we can actually learn something from the situation, something that will help us in our own journeys. And I think that this is a really important topic that we're going to talk about today, because any of us are capable of it, as we're going to find. And it seems like the higher you go in leadership, the higher you go within a company or organization, and can you imagine on Nathan Fletcher's level, county supervisor of one of the largest counties probably in the United States of America, there's a sense of power that comes with that. There's not a sense, there's a real power that comes with that, right? And but he lost his way. So here's the article. It says this: Nathan Fletcher's recent resignation due to alcohol abuse, PTSD, and personal peccadillos comes as a sudden shock. No doubt there's more to the story, and no doubt we'll get more information regarding the background details, all of which will explain in part how this fall from grace could have occurred. But the underlying and manifold reasons for his personal and ethical failures relate quite simply to one characteristic we all have in common: being human. And I appreciate that the author stated that. I appreciate that the author kind of puts us in, puts all of this in perspective. Nathan Fletcher's just like you and me. He's human, right? And he made human decisions that led to very real consequences. The article goes on. That's right. Nathan Fletcher's failures can be explained by reference to his fallible humanity, a humanity we all share. But what was it in particular that made the shoo-in for higher office so vulnerable to missteps? In short, the psychology of leadership and something called the Bathsheba syndrome. The Bathsheba syndrome, based on the Old Testament story of King David, holds that many ethical failures by upper management are the byproduct not of competitive pressures, but of success itself. King David's transgressions included, among other things, an affair, deception, drunkenness, and a feeling he had, through his own cleverness, beaten the system. But his moral failures eventually caught up with him and led to predictably bad outcomes. And then in parentheses it says, uncannily similar to what Nathan Fletcher is now experiencing. So how could any of this have happened? Now, in order to go to this, he actually talks about this a little bit, the Bathsheba syndrome, but I actually want to go to, I actually found the article that they were talking about, and it's called that exactly. It's from 1993, I believe. So this is an old article. So this would be, as of this year, this would be a 30-year-old article. 30-year-old article, and it probably would have helped if Nathan Fletcher would have read this before making the decisions that he made, but we can't control what he did, but we can control what we do. So we're going to read about it, and we're going to talk about it, because all of us are capable of making the same kind of mistake that Nathan Fletcher made. So here's what I'm on page 268 now. This is an academic journal article called The Bathsheba Syndrome, The Ethical Failure of Successful Leaders by Dean C. Ludwig and Clinton O. Longenecker. Clinton O. Longenecker. So I'm going to move where he talks about the story of David and Bathsheba. And if you don't know the story, it's found in the Bible. You can just Google it, and there's all kinds of things that come up about it. And basically, it was a king. I'm going to see if I get this right. I should be able to get this correct. Basically, it was a king, and King David, a very powerful king, found himself one afternoon. He wasn't where he needed to be. He should have been in battle with his men out there on the forefront. He should have been on his purpose. He should have been doing the things that kings do. But he found himself lonely at dusk one day, afternoon dusk, and across the way he sees this beautiful woman. And he finds out who this beautiful woman is, and he finds out it's the wife of one of his commanders, which should have been right there. None of that should have happened, right? If he'd been on his purpose, if he'd been out to battle, if he'd been out doing the job he was supposed to be doing as king. But he finds out that this woman is one of his commanders, but none of that stops him. He brings the woman in. There's a whole power, there's a whole corruption thing because there's power there. Who knows if she really wanted to come? Who knows if she really wanted to be a part of the situation, if she wanted to meet with King David, but because of his power and because of the culture and all the dynamics that went in place, she did, and they made love, and she becomes pregnant. And so what David then does, I mean, this is the cover-up of all cover-ups. He invites Uriah, who's Bathsheba's husband, invites him back from the field. Uriah doesn't want to come back from the field. He needs to be out there with his men. That's where he wants to be. And he says, hey, no. So David's trying to cover up. He gets Uriah's wife pregnant. That's Bathsheba. But he wants to cover it up. So he brings her husband back thinking that they'll sleep together. And then when she becomes pregnant, when it's clear that she's pregnant, it will be clear that this was something that her husband did. So it'd be the great cover-up. And so Uriah came back, but he said, I'm not going to sleep with my wife. I think he sleeps outside that night. So he ends up going back to battle. And King David eventually has him killed, has him sent to the very front, and it has him killed. He realizes if this guy isn't going to help me with the cover-up, then he's obviously going to find out the answer. I can't have that happen. So he has him killed. All of this leads to predictable outcomes. David is caught. The prophet Nathan comes to him. He has to confess. The baby, I don't know how this works out, but it's either that the baby doesn't make it or there's a tragic story for the baby of David and Bathsheba. I should know that, but I'm not exactly sure. Anyway, it was just a tragic ending, and it's just a forever stain on this guy's reputation. Almost like back in the 90s, if you remember Bill Clinton. And I was a huge Clinton fan, still am. Was a huge fan of Hillary Clinton, still am. I love the Clinton family. I was able to meet him. I'd read like 4 books on the guy, and I was in the U.S. Army. This was back in the 1990s, back when all this was actually happening, back in 1998. And I had a chance to meet with him. I had a chance to meet him. I was at a small luncheon with a few soldiers, and it was just an incredible opportunity to meet the President of the United States and someone that I looked up to. But this is the same kind of story, massively talented. I mean, that guy made it to the presidency in spite of all the rumors and everything that had happened before. He made it all the way to the presidency, but something couldn't stop him. And he made a mistake, and there will be people who say he had the ability to be one of the number one presidents of the United States, right? To be one of the top-ranked presidents of the United States. His ability to work across the aisle to bring people together, but he won't go down that way because of what happened with Monica Lewinsky. Almost kind of the same situation. The government had stopped. The government had stopped working. The government was on strike. Clinton's still in his office, so he was doing the work, but he's going to his office, but there's nobody else there. During that time, he's lonely. Whatever happens, he finds himself with Monica Lewinsky, and then we all know the consequences of that story as well. So this happens to people, but it's amazing how it happens to really successful people. Right? When we hear about the neighbor that this happens to, or the person maybe at the job down the street or something like that, or the person we grew up with who was kind of the guy that nobody respected in any way, right? No one expected anything good to come out of him. We just kind of laugh it off and say, oh, that's so-and-so, right? But when we hear about successful people, how do you make that decision? That's what the Bathsheba syndrome is here to talk about. So let me dive in here, page 268, the story of David and Bathsheba. I'm not going to read all of this. There's a lot here to read, but I want to pick out the key parts so we can get to the lessons for you and for me. Most individuals are at least vaguely familiar with the story of David and Bathsheba, but we would especially like to point out some of the details leading up to David's violation and point out how in many ways the story of David and Bathsheba is paradigmatic for many of the ethical failures of successful leaders which we witness today. How did David, a good, talented, and successful leader, get entangled in this downward spiral of events? The scriptural accounts provide some insight and offer food for thought for today's leader. Now, this is not a Christian article. I don't want you to think that I'm not trying to throw faith on you or, but so this was an academic article written based on the biblical story. So here's some of the lessons. Okay, so we've got three primary ones, or at least three insights, right? Three insights that we can think about even today. So number one is this: David loses strategic focus in success. So it's almost like his success caused him to lose strategic focus. The story of David and Bathsheba begins by noting that David is not where he's supposed to be, doing what he's supposed to be doing. His recent successes in battle have apparently left David complacent that his overall strategy did not need revision for the time being, and complacent that his subordinates were capable of executing the current strategy on their own. Again, battle is happening. He's supposed to be out in battle. That's back in the day when kings went to battle with their men, but he got complacent, right? He'd already had a lot of success. He said, you know what, you all go do it. I'll stay back here at the palace. Instead of leading his troops in the battle, he was, as was his role as king, he stayed home, leaving the direction of his troops during critical battles to his right-hand man Joab. David was apparently comfortable that Joab would be able to handle things. And then it goes on to say, how often today we see executives lead their organizations to the top of the competitive heap, displaying exceptional courage, energy, and leadership, only then to put their organizations on autopilot, kick back, and indulge themselves for all the sacrifices that they've made along the way. Their setup for ethical failure begins by not being where they're supposed to be. Not only does this expose the leader to potential conflict, but by not being with the troops through a time of crisis and competition, it opens the door to questionable ethical behavior by subordinates. So I think that's the thing that we have to understand as well. When the leader is not doing what he needs to do, it opens up the door for unethical behavior for people in the organization. And I've seen this before. I'm getting to the place where I'm starting to say, if I see it in the organization, more than likely it's somewhere in the leadership team. I remember years ago, again, going back to Clinton, there was a friend of mine who was in law enforcement, and he said that he talked with somebody who was in the Secret Service, and they had friends who worked for both the Clinton and the George Bush administration. That's Bush 42. No, there's Bush 41 and Bush 43. So it would have been the 43rd president of the United States, which is George W. Bush. And George W. Bush really ran a very, it was a scandal-free, just like Barack Obama after him. Both were scandal-free presidencies. You didn't have all these stories about personal dalliances and all this other stuff kind of going on. They were kind of boring in that way. They really focused on policy. George W. Bush was very, the word that comes to my mind is conservative, but I don't mean politically. For instance, he would never ever be in the Oval Office without a suit and tie on. It was just a rule that he had. And he would let nobody else in the Oval Office without a suit and tie on. Bill Clinton was a little bit different. Bill Clinton was a little bit more laid back. You hear about the stories about how he led and things that happened. But here's what the Secret Service member told my friend. Both, again, were in law enforcement. That's how they had that relationship. And what he said was this, that he said it was interesting that during Clinton's time in office, because of the culture that was set at the top, you begin to see all of this down through the ranks. So lots more people were having affairs. Lots more people were kind of getting themselves into trouble. There were questionable things happening at all levels of the organization. So that's the dangerous thing, is that when the leader, right, and leadership is really all about helping other people push forward towards the mission, helping other people succeed, helping other people make the mission manifest, achieve the vision, achieve the goals. But if the leader's not doing that, if they're delegating that off to somebody else, and I'm not saying that as a leader you don't delegate, okay? That's not what I'm saying at all. You've got to empower. You've got to have, if you're a CEO, you've got senior vice presidents, you've got vice presidents, you've got people that help you get the job done. You've got a COO, you've got, you probably got CFOs and CIOs and all this kind of stuff, people to help you get the job done. But you still need to be on the game. You still need to be, your head still must be in the game. If you remove yourself from the game and you just say, well, these other people will take care of it, that laziness begins to get down in the organization. And then other people start taking their eye off the ball as well. And then the mission's not happening, right? It's that lack of complacency that's happening. And so it wasn't even just about what it did for David. It's also about what it does for his subordinates, the other people in his area of influence. It goes on to say, David's failure of leadership is certainly not that he delegated. Okay, that's what we just talked about, though the accounts indicate that it was a king's duty to be with his troops in battle. Rather, David delegated and then ignored what was happening. That's the key, because he was so complacent. He delegated, but didn't stay on top of it. Didn't say, hey, I'm going to delegate this to you, but every day, or, you don't want to micromanage, but especially with battle, with kings, every day he should have been receiving some kind of report. Every day he should have been surrounded by people back at the palace. If he was going to do it this way, he still should have been doing the work, but remotely, as we might call it today, right? Now, technically he should have been out there, right? He should have been on the field, but if he's not going to be in the field, he still needed to be engaged in something having to do with the battle. He did not give supervision to Joab. In addition, David seemed to be delegating not out of a sense of necessity, but one of a sense of self-indulgence. That is, David was delegating not because he needed to free time for other duties, but because he wanted more time for leisure. That's what's going to get you in trouble every single time. And I'm speaking to men here, especially. I mean, this podcast is for men and women, but I would say this to men. I have a pretty conservative, maybe you might call it. I have a pretty strict view on kind of the role of men in society. And men in society, just as they have been for years, thousands of years, you look at the evolutionary process of men, they need to be out there, killing. And they need to be out, and I don't mean killing people. You get what I'm saying, right? They need to be out there on their purpose. They need to be out there working. They need to be out there bringing in resources and food to their people. That's what men do. But David was searching for leisure, and that's going to get you in trouble every single time. David may have felt he needed or deserved a break after his early conquest. It is interesting that he did not feel his troops also needed or deserved to share in this break. So he wanted it for himself, but not for anyone else. Number 2, David's success leads to privileged access. David's success leads to privileged access. As was mentioned, David's leisure allowed him the opportunity literally to look around. He was not focused on organizational decision making. Instead, his lack of preoccupation allowed him to see things he otherwise wouldn't have noticed. That's what leadership does. It puts you in positions where you get to see things that other people don't, right? You get to be in rooms that other people don't get to. You get to have access to people and ideas and opportunities that other people don't get, right? But as the article is getting ready to talk about, true leadership mindset says that it's not about you. It's about using those opportunities to help other people. A service mindset, right? Second, the article goes on, his privileged position high atop the roof of the palace allowed him to see things that were sheltered to those at lower levels. Again, when you're on the lowest levels, you can't see what other people get to see. You have a much different view about what happened. And that's why oftentimes that, you've heard this saying before, sometimes you just got to trust the leader because they're seeing things that you can't see, right? So down where we're at, it just looks like, hey, that's a horrible decision, but we're not seeing the full picture like the leader is. That's part of the privilege of leadership. You get to see things that other people don't get to see, okay? It would have been clear to someone at the lower level that violation of Bathsheba's privacy was wrong, for they would have had somehow had to circumvent the wall that separated her bath from public view. It was easy, however, for David to forget that it was not his right to view this beautiful woman at Bath. His privileged vantage point was designed to give him a perspective, a view that would help him lead his people, not a view that would feed his self-indulgence. That's the key. When we get into positions of leadership, it's not about your self-indulgence. It's about the people. It's about other people. That's what leadership's all about. When we get positions of leadership, it always has to be about other people, serving other people. It's not about self-indulgence. By this point, David's lack of involvement in the leadership combined with his privileged position allowed him to shift his focus to the satisfaction of personal wants. Many of the scandals we've witnessed in recent years have evolved from privileged access to information, people and objects, and from the leaders' apparent inability to understand that their privileged position is supposed to give them a perspective from which they can effectively lead, not from which they can more effectively satisfy personal wants. Leadership is never about you. It's never about me. It's always about other people. Number 3, David's success leads to control of resources and inflated belief in personal ability to control outcomes. The story of David and Bathsheba unfolds through a degenerative progression of indulgence and cover-up. As the story of David and Bathsheba develops, David sends servants to investigate who this beautiful woman was and that she was who this beautiful woman was that he saw from his roof. When he found that she was not only married, but married to one of his officers, he knew it would be a grave offense to take her to bed. Yet her husband was off in battle, and the servants, knowing the consequences, could certainly be counted on for silence. David sends for Bathsheba, sleeps with her, and she becomes pregnant. Now, we talked about this already in the hopes of covering up the violation. David brings back Bathsheba's husband under false pretense, says, please sleep with your wife. She doesn't sleep with the wife, sends it back out, has him murdered. It goes on to say this. And then it gives the consequence, right? David, let me see if I get the message of Uriah's death sentence. It tells Joab to send Uriah to the front of the fiercest battle and then withdraw, leaving Uriah and other innocents to die. After Uriah's death, David sent word to Joab not to let what had just happened seem evil in his sight. Smug in his cover-up, David then took Bathsheba into his house as wife. Hey, he's helping him out now. Hey, this person lost their husband as the king. I'm going to be responsible and take care of this woman. And that happened in that culture back in the day. So he's almost kind of showing his virtue in this. He's, look, I'm a virtuous leader. I'm going to take care of this person. It was the prophet Nathan, an outsider to the events, who finally exposed David. And then it says this: David, in short, chose to do something he knew was clearly wrong in the firm belief that through his personal power and control over resources, he could cover up. And see, that's what leadership gives people, right? When you lead and lead well, you reach a place where you get personal power and control over resources, control over people, right? He talked about that. The servants aren't going to tell, because if they tell, I'm going to fire him. They're going to have horrible consequences. They're not going to have jobs or whatever. So the servants aren't going to tell. So he's got power over resources and over people. David's inflated self-confident belief in his own personal ability to manipulate the outcome of this story is probably representative of the attitude of many of today's professionally trained managers of business. Trained in attitude and technique to get things done and make things happen, today's business school graduates often possess a dangerously inflated self-confidence, reinforced by success, given increasing control of resources, and subjected to decreasing levels of supervision. And that's all of that is what David had. Okay? He had success. He also had increasing control of resources. He was in all of that, right? The success and increased resources, he was given decreased levels of supervision. That happened to David, it happens to us, and this is the recipe for disaster, okay? These managers too often stumble as they move into leadership roles. So let's move a little bit further in the article. It talks a little about, in this article, success as an antecedent to ethical failure, right? It talks about personal success, and there are positive benefits to personal success. You gain position, influence, status, rewards, perks, recognition, latitude, associations, access to people. It's personal. But there's a negative side to it as well, right? There's an inflated belief in personal ability that I did all this on my own, right? Emotionally expansive, an unbalanced personal life. There's an inflated ego that happens. There's isolation that happens in this. The higher you go, the fewer people are going to be on the mountain with you. So you become more isolated. There's more stress, there's more transference, there's more emptiness, there's fear of failure. And all of that happens, right, the higher you go. So there are a lot of benefits to personal success, but there's also the negative side. On the organizational side as well, right, there's a lot of benefits to, there's a lot of benefits there, right? There's no direct supervision. There's the ability to influence other people. There's the ability to set the agenda, control over decision making. These are all things that Nathan Fletcher had, right? And that's what this article is setting us up for, that when you begin to see these, now none of these are bad, right? And I'm not shaming Nathan Fletcher for being who he was, or I'm not even shaming him for the decision he made. Look, we're all human, but for the grace of God, there go I. So I'm not shaming him for that decision he made as well. But it's important for you and I to understand that when these things begin to happen in life, when we begin to see these things, these are all warning signs for us that, hey, okay, I've got position, influence, status, right? I've got no direct supervision. I've got the ability to influence. These all sound good, right? The ability to set the agenda, control over decision making. Who doesn't want any of this? But the flip side to all of this, right? The organization goes on autopilot. There's delegation without supervising, right? So you become kind of lazy, strategic complacency, and neglect of strategy, right? So basically, you're taking your eye off the ball, and that happens every single time, right? So, well, I don't want to say it happens every single time, but every single time we see a person in a position of influence who fails, this is exactly what happens. They got everything over here on the side, but they didn't understand this other side over here. They had all the positives, but they didn't realize all the negatives and disadvantages of success, right? Unbalanced personal life, inflated ego, stress, emptiness, fear of failure. The organization goes on autopilot. You're delegating without supervising. You neglect strategy. You take your eye off the ball. And this has happened every single time, right? You begin to think, as David did, you begin to put all that attention and energy, that needs to go towards success, that needs to go towards taking the company to the next level, taking the organization to the next level, whatever that looks like. That's where the energy should be going. But instead, it's like, hey, I reached this point on the mountain. This is not too bad, and you begin to take your eye off the ball, and that's what happens in almost every situation. So here's the conclusion. I guess that here are the lessons. But before I get to the conclusion, where we talk about some things that need to happen, some things that could happen, right? Some advice for successful leaders. I want to read what the lessons state here in this article. And number one is this. Okay, so these are the lessons from David's sad experience, and they're obvious. Number one is this: leaders are in their positions to focus on doing what is right for their organization's short-term and long-term success. This cannot happen if they aren't where they're supposed to be, doing what they're supposed to be doing. So that's the first thing, right? We need to understand that leaders, and once you're in a position of leadership, you have to understand this as well. Your only job, even in a position of leadership, is to be where you're supposed to be and do what you're supposed to do. Number two, there will always be temptations that come in a variety of shapes and forms that will tempt leaders to make decisions they know they shouldn't make. With success come additional ethical trials. It's almost like with money as well. And a lot of people talk about this. I've heard rich people talk about this, that, hey, once you get money, right, like more money, more problems, right? And we should say the same about power, more problems, more leadership, more problems, right? The higher you go, for the rest of us, it looks like, wow, there's a CEO of an organization, everything must be great at that level. And it's not true. Again, because of everything that we just talked about. Yes, there's a lot of success up there. There's a lot of position, status, latitude, associated access, no direct supervision, all that stuff. But what comes with that is inflated ego, isolation, stress, all these other things that lead to problems that we see in the future. There will always be, that's what it says, there will always be temptations, right? I don't know if I read that. That's number two. There will always be temptations that come with a variety of shapes and forms that will tempt leaders to make decisions that they know they shouldn't make. Yeah, that's what I already read. With success will come additional trials. Number three, perpetrating an unethical act is a personal conscious choice on the part of the leader that frequently places a greater emphasis on personal gratification rather than on the organization's needs. So again, we come to a point where as a leader, the focus needs to be on the organization. The focus needs to be on empowering other people. But if we're not in that situation, if we're not in that mindset, we become complacent. Where our minds tend to go then is on personal gratification, okay, on myself. I'm thinking about me. I'm not thinking about the organization. I'm thinking about me. I'm not thinking about other people. Then it turns to personal gratification. You've got all this time. You've got no supervision. You got nobody around who's watching you. So your mind begins to shift to other things. Again, leadership means the higher we go, and I guess that's what I'm taking from this, the higher we go, the more focused we need to become. The higher you go in leadership, the more focused you need to become. Off of yourself, off of your own personal pleasures, your own personal gratification, and towards the aim of the organization. Number four, it is difficult, if not impossible, to partake in unethical behavior without implicating and or involving others in the organizations. That is powerful. That's powerful right there. I'm going to read that one more time. It is difficult, if not impossible, to partake in unethical behavior without implicating and or involving others in the organization. So here's what I'm reading with that one. If you're in a leadership position, and you're engaging in unethical behavior, what's really dangerous and sad about that is you're involving other people. You're taking other people down with you. It's not just you, right? So you've got to think about the consequences for other people. I mean, look at the situation with David. Look at all the people who were involved in this. It wasn't just David's wants or needs. There were servants that saw what happened. There were servants that went over to see what Bathsheba, who she was and what she was doing. And they came back and they had to tell David. So they knew what was going on. There were people who had to sneak Bathsheba into David's house. They knew what was going on. There was Uriah, who ended up getting murdered at the end of it all. Bathsheba lost her husband, had the scarlet letter. Joab was a part of this. So all of this was David's manipulation so he could have personal gratification. That's what's dangerous about this. And again, in the Nathan Fletcher situation, we see the same thing as well. And he's trying to get her to cover up. I think what was sad for me to read was that he was sending her these text messages, but he kept telling her, hey, make sure you delete these messages because I don't want my staff seeing this. Sometimes my staff have access to my account, so I don't want them to see these messages. So he kept deleting as he was going. She obviously saved him because in the court affidavit, you see several of these. You see the screenshots of the conversation between the two of them. It's proof that it's there, right? And so that's probably the most sobering, or that's one of the more sobering ones, is the realization that if I'm a leader and I choose to do unethical behavior, I've got to involve somebody else. So not only am I being unethical, I'm asking other people to be unethical as well. It's really dangerous ground that we're walking on. And number 5, attempts to cover up unethical practices can have dire organizational consequences, including innocent people getting hurt, power being abused, trust being violated, other individuals being corrupted, and the diversion of needed resources. Look, we're seeing all of this with the situation right here in San Diego. Okay? Innocent people got hurt. The young lady who Nathan had his eye on, she's hurt. She ended up getting fired. That's what blew this whole thing. Was she got fired prior to all of this happening, and what they're saying, what she's alleging, is that she was intimidated by both Nathan Fletcher, or at least by his wife, who's a very powerful person here in California. So innocent people got hurt, and she was innocent. When you go back and read the messages, he really did. He pursued her. And in that position of power, that had to be complicated for her to figure, if I don't do this, like, how's that going to impact my job? And she wasn't right in the situation. There were things that happened in the situation. She wasn't right either in the situation. Okay, and she's gonna have to recognize that her name will always be attached to this. Anytime someone Googles her, she goes on a date, her name will always be attached to this situation. And she made some missteps in this situation. I'm not blaming her. I'm not victim shaming here, but I'm saying she didn't make all the right decisions either. But there's a power dynamic there, right? So she's the innocent one, right, in this situation. Power, but I also think about Nathan Fletcher's kids. I think about Lorena Gonzalez's kids, his stepchildren. I think about all these people that are now hurt and embarrassed by this guy that just days ago they looked up to and said that this is, imagine being one of his sons and saying, man, this is, there's no greater dad that I could have than a county supervisor who's going to become a state senator, who vacations with the governor of California and probably going to be governor of California one day on his own. Who better, right? And what a great dad to have, but these people got hurt. Power was abused in this situation. Absolutely. When you're in a position of power and you take a subordinate and you hit on them and you make your moves to them, that's abusing power. Trust is violated. The trust that so many people had placed in Nathan Fletcher, absolutely violated. Other individuals being corrupted, right? The story, the story is yet to be told. But I'm guessing that there were probably somewhere in all of this, there was some cover-ups happening. And the diversion of needed resources. So now all the attention that needs to go towards how do we help the homeless here in San Diego, how do we help with the housing crisis in San Diego, all that attention is gone right now as they try to figure out how do we investigate this, what happened, who did this. So all these resources are now put on this situation because of Nathan's desire. He sees a beautiful woman and says, I want her, and now here we are. Now, again, I don't want to, and I keep saying this, and it sounds like I'm not judging the guy. I'm just stating facts. I'm stating facts. I'm not judging him. He's human. I'm human. But for the grace of God, there go I. But this is the lesson for all of us. We have to understand that we all could be in the same situation. Every single one of us are capable of doing the exact same thing. Number 6 says this in terms of lessons: not getting caught initially can produce self-delusion and increase the likelihood of future unethical behavior. And that's the thing, is he wasn't caught at first. No one caught him. No one knew what he was doing. I'm guessing. I'm sure. I've heard that there were rumors that were going around for quite a while. My guess is there's probably other women out there. Not all of them are going to come forward. There's probably more to this story that we'll never know. But he didn't get caught. And because he didn't get caught, you continue and continue. Well, I sent this one text, no one found out. I sent this other text, hey, I met up with this person. I made a move on this person, no one found out. And all of a sudden, here we are. And it's not a good situation. And so because you don't get caught, again, you just keep doing it. And all of a sudden, you're wondering, how did I get caught? Well, technically, you didn't get caught. I mean, for Nathan Fletcher, for over a year and a half, it seems like, or 2 years, whatever it was, he didn't get caught. But then it all caught up to him, right? And he did get caught. Number 7, getting caught can destroy the leader. The organization, innocent people, and everything the leader has spent his life working for. And I think that's what's so sad about this situation with Nathan Fletcher. And that's what's sad about I can name several people. There's a website now that's dedicated to finding church leaders who make mistakes. And that's called julieroys.com. And she's becoming, I think churches are becoming afraid of her now, because when she calls, they know what's going to happen. They're going on the front of her website. Then you Google that person's name, and she's one of the first websites that come up. And it's a situation where these leaders, and it's just so sad. And it's almost like every month you see a major leader that takes a fall. And we've seen countless in the church world, political world, local governments. It just continues to happen. And it absolutely destroys the leader. In this case, it's not going to destroy the organization, because the organization is the county. But there's going to be it's going to destroy other politicians. People are not going to put, all these dirty politicians. See, I told you, they're all dirty, right? And it's not true. They're not. A lot of them are really trying to do good work. Innocent people. The young lady in the situation, Grecia Figueroa, she'll always be attached to this. We live in the internet. We live in the digital age. She will always be attached to this situation. And everything the leader has spent his life working for, and that's what's happened to Nathan. That's what's so sad, is he was on an upward trajectory. Even if he comes back in the future, which I think is pretty doubtful, and I could be wrong on all this. I mean, the same thing happened with our governor, California, right? He got wrapped up in the same thing, but I don't think there were allegations of sexual assault, and there certainly was a power dynamic here, and he became governor. So who knows what the future holds? We will see what the future holds. San Diegans don't typically, they're not very forgiving of this, right? They typically put people, they put you out to pasture. And so we'll see. Gavin Newsom was up in San Francisco. I think it's a little bit different up there. I'm not saying that for better or for worse, but whatever the situation is, it worked for him. Who knows why? I don't know. We'll see if it works for Nathan Fletcher, but Nathan Fletcher's no Gavin Newsom. He doesn't have all the contacts. He doesn't have all the connections, so we'll see what happens in the future. But my guess is we won't see him in the same way that we've seen him in the past. Sarah Jacobs, who's one of the Congress people here, very powerful, connected to a very powerful, she's part of a very powerful family, the Jacobs family here in San Diego. She issued a statement saying, I rescind all support that I've given to him. And my understanding is that her family helped bankroll him for quite a while. I don't know if they actually bankrolled him, but they provided positions for him, endowed a seat for him at UCSD, and they've been very good to him. And now she, as a congresswoman, is saying, I rescind everything, all my support, ever. And more than likely, that connection is going to go with it as well. So here's what it says in conclusion. First, we need to understand it could happen to you. David was an intelligent, principled individual. So let's not judge him too harshly. I believe this. I believe that Nathan Fletcher was a highly intelligent, principled individual. He had a lot of success in his life. We can't forget that. So too are many of your colleagues that you read about in the paper these days. It's not simply the unprincipled and those under competitive pressure who fall victim to ethical violation. Stand forewarned, the article says, of David's painful experience and read the papers for constant reminders. That's what I do. I constantly read the papers for reminders about if I want to make these stupid decisions. It's like that saying, play stupid decisions, win stupid or play stupid games, win stupid prizes. The same thing can happen to you as it can happen to me. Second, realize that living a balanced life reduces the likelihood of negatives of success causing you to lose touch with reality. Family, relationships, interest, right? Imagine, there's one story with this Nathan Fletcher situation where I think the situation was like on New Year's Eve, and he had just posted something with his family, and then he's sending this young lady some messages on the side or whatever. Imagine if that whole time he put his phone down and he just spent time with his family, if he spent time with his healthy relationships. I don't think he'd be in the same situation, okay? Third, understand that your primary function is to provide strategic direction and leadership at all levels. Avoid becoming complacent with strategic direction and current performance. Strategic direction is never set, no matter how successful. The privilege and status that have been granted to you is designed to enhance your strategic vision. It is not simply reward for a job already accomplished. That's the thing. Your mindset has to completely be on the vision for the organization, the vision for the community, and it's got to be forward focused always. And that's the thing. Somehow with Nathan Fletcher, he lost that forward focus and began to, I don't know if it was complacency or whatever it was, but his mind began to take off where the county should go or all the things. And after COVID, and he was kind of the face of that for the county of San Diego. And a lot of people would say he did a lot of great things during that time. He led extremely well during that period of time. But then coming off of that, the question should have been, okay, I've talked about this multiple times before, creative destruction. Okay, now how do I get rid of the old and start bringing in the new? The question should have been continuous improvement. How do I continue moving this organization, this county forward, right? Fourth, build an ethical team of managers around you who will inspire you to lead by example and who will challenge or comfort you when you need either. Right. And here's what I would say, because, again, I have a view of this. Women should be surrounded by strong, ethical women, and men should be surrounded by strong, ethical men. You can hate on me for that. I don't care, but I absolutely believe that with all my heart. I know for me personally, that's what I'll say for me. Right. Maybe I don't need to preach that to you, but for me, it will be consistently being surrounded by ethical men. Right. I don't need the extra temptation. For me, that's not an area of temptation for me. If I'm surrounded by ethical men, that means I'm surrounded by good people who are helping me make good decisions on a consistent basis. Finally, ethical leadership is simply part of good leadership and requires focus. Talked about that before. That's leadership. Staying focused on where you need to stay focused, on the organization, on the mission, the vision of the organization, the appropriate use of resources, trust, effective decision-making, and provision of model behavior that is worth following. Once it is lost, it is difficult, if not impossible, to retain. Trust is key, and that's the thing, right? That's the situation. That's the difficult. And look, I'm not judging Nathan Fletcher because I've been there, and I'll tell you this: when you lose trust with a person or a group of people, it is difficult, if not impossible, to retain. And if you're going to, it's going to take a lot of hard work over a lot of time. It's like it sets you all the way back to the starting point. And then it gives some observations in order for boards of directors and others responsible for overseeing organizational leaders. First, it says this: board involvement should include concern for the leader's personal and psychological balance. That's going to be tough in today's world, but what it's saying is that as board members, we should be able to ask questions about how are you doing on a personal level. We want to make sure that you're healthy and you're leading this organization well. How are you doing on a personal level? Second, boards should erect guardrails. Detection is the primary factor that deters unethical behavior. Organizations should make prudent use of such devices, such as audits, right? And one of the boards I sit on, they do regular audits, most of the boards, and I appreciate that. I'm grateful for that. Audits of critical organizational decisions and process. That's probably something that they do, financial audits, but probably should have consultants come in every now and then and just look at the decision processes. How do we make decisions around here? What's the accountability in place, right? Third, boards must clearly establish and implement ethical codes of conduct for organizational leaders and take steps to regularly heighten both the awareness and compliance with such standards. Look, in the county of San Diego, they should have been talking about this. This should have come up. They should have been talking about not just your public leadership and what you're doing and your political life and raising money and all that stuff. There should have been continued conversation about how are you as a person, right? And this is what I'm going to give my life to. And I'm going to give my life to it because I know, based on painful experiences that I've made in my own life, I know what can happen when you take your eye off the ball and you're not focused in on where you need to be focused in. So that's why I think this is really important to me. It's really passionate to me. Finally, for those engaged in business ethics training, that's people like myself, we suggest a broadened understanding of why leaders, managers sometimes abandon their own principles. Do we too quickly focus on the maintenance of ethical behavior in the face of competitive pressure? Should we also discuss the maintenance of ethical behavior in the face of success, right? So we talk about it when there's competition, here's how you should act. But what about when there's success? How should you act then in success, right? Is adherence to principle in either the face of competitive pressure or the wake of success a matter of ethics or of virtue? If success leads to increased levels of power, then we must take steps to deal with the phenomenon that power corrupts. Researchers and academicians must look for creative ways to prevent this from occurring while not limiting the ability of leaders to lead. So it's not about micromanaging leaders and squeezing them so tight that they can't lead, but it is about helping them. And I think the biggest point that we can take from all of this is we've got to be forward focused at all times. We can't take our eye off the ball. That's what David did. That's what David did. He had everything that you could possibly want. He had success, access to resources, power over people. But what happened with David was he took his eye off the ball, and that's the same thing that can happen to any single one of us. We can take our eye off the ball. And again, remember that when you do that, you're going to take down a lot of other people too. You're going to hurt people. You're going to break trust. It's really not a good situation. So I hope that this has added value too. I hope it's been a good conversation for you. Just remember that, the Bathsheba syndrome, okay? Let's not judge anybody else, but for the grace of God, there go I. But just understand in your own life, you may not even make that kind of a situation at that level, but you might make some other kind of a, humdinger kind of a decision that's not going to be great. And so I just want to encourage you, stay on your game, stay on your purpose, stay focused. That's our job as leaders. I'll see you in the next podcast. Take care.